One heartbeat. That's all the time Frances Olvera had to decide if she was willing to put her throat within striking distance of the most dangerous predator in the room. The Midnight Gala had been silk and starlight just moments before. Immortals in couture darker than their souls. Ancient creatures dancing through the grand hall like beautiful nightmares, the kind of power that moved through crowds like winter frost, turning everything it touched to ice. Frances had been serving that power, invisible in her crisp white shirt and black vest. Just another mortal shadow carrying crystal goblets of imported wine to beings who saw her as little more than livestock in server's attire. Then she passed the eastern colonnade. Then she smelled it. Ozone and iron. Burnt sugar and decay. The scent hit her like a physical blow. She'd smelled it once before, years ago, when a feral vampire had torn through her neighborhood. The scent of a predator losing its grip on sanity. The smell of a hunger so ancient and absolute it could swallow cities whole. Frances froze. Her pulse hammered against her throat like a rabbit sensing the wolf. The guests didn't notice. They never did. Too busy with their political dances, their century-old grudges, their immortal games. But her eyes tracked the movement through the velvet curtains and locked onto the figure stumbling toward the marble balcony. Leonarth Grayson. She didn't know his title yet. Didn't know that the courts called him the Crimson King, that his bloodline stretched back to the First Dark Age, that the mark hidden beneath his collar had ended bloodlines older than Christianity. All she saw was a vampire in an immaculate tuxedo, his pale hands gripping the balustrade, his shoulders trembling, his jaw locked against something that wanted desperately to break free. His eyes were wrong. The elegant silver gray she'd glimpsed earlier had bled to feral crimson, pupils dilated to consuming black. The veins beneath his marble-white skin writhed like shadows trying to escape. Blood starvation. The kind that turned ancients into monsters. The kind that ended with bodies drained to husks scattered across ballroom floors. Frances's tray trembled in her hands. She should have backed away. Should have alerted security. Found the Vampire Council representatives. Let the Immortals handle their own crisis. But her feet carried her forward. Because she'd seen what happened when a starving vampire lost control in a room full of humans. She'd identified her father's remains by his wedding ring. She knew exactly how many heartbeats a frenzy lasted. And there were 47 mortal staff members working this gala tonight. The king's head snapped toward her. The movement was too fast, too fluid, wrong in the way apex predators were wrong. His nostrils flared. She watched his pupils blow wider as her scent reached him. Warm blood, living pulse, prey. He took a step toward her, then another. His movements were jerky now. Fighting. Himself. Fighting the hunger that was winning. Frances didn't run. Running triggered the chase. Running meant death. Instead, she did the last thing any sane human would do. She walked straight toward him. Her shoes clicked against marble like a countdown. Each step measured, each breath controlled. Your Majesty. Her voice came out steady, soft, the tone you'd use with a spooked animal. I see you. He stopped. Something flickered in those crimson eyes. Confusion, rage, hunger so vast it had its own gravity. His lips pulled back. She saw fangs, not the elegant points from romance novels, but the real thing. Predator's teeth designed to tear through flesh and lock onto arteries. His breath came in ragged gasps, and she could see him losing the battle with his own instincts. 20 feet between them, then 15. His control was fracturing like ice over deep water. Frances didn't hesitate. She reached up, grabbed the small paring knife tucked into her server's apron, the one she used to garnish cocktails, and dragged it across her bottom lip. Sharp. Quick. The way her mother had taught her to break a fever. Blood welled. Bright and red and impossibly tempting. Leonarth's entire body went rigid. His eyes locked onto her mouth like a drowning man spotting shore. She closed the distance between them in 3 strides, her free hand tangling in his perfectly styled curls, pulling his face down to hers. Their lips met in a collision that was anything but romantic. It was survival. It was sacrifice. It was a human girl offering herself as an anchor to keep a monster from slaughtering everyone in the room. She tasted copper and eternity. His arms came around her, crushing her against a chest that held no heartbeat. For one terrible second, she thought she'd miscalculated, thought he would drain her right there against the balustrade. Then she felt it. The tension bleeding from his shoulders, the crimson fading from his eyes, the feral edge smoothing back into calculated control. She whispered against his lips, her voice barely a breath. The wine was poisoned. Someone wants you dead. His body went rigid again, but this time with awareness rather than hunger. His hands tightened on her waist, too tight, bruising, and his eyes snapped to hers with an intensity that burned. Those eyes were silver again, clear, intelligent, furious, and utterly convinced she was the threat. She felt it in the way his grip shifted, the way his gaze cataloged every detail of her face like he was memorizing a target, the way his fangs pressed just slightly against his lower lip, still extended, still dangerous. He thought the kiss was the poison, thought her blood was the trap. Francis tried to step back, tried to explain, but his hand caught her wrist in an iron grip. Don't move. His voice was silk over steel, centuries of command in 2 words. Wait, you don't understand. The guards appeared from nowhere, 6 vampires in black suits, moving with that terrible, fluid grace. One grabbed her other arm, another pressed something cold against her throat. Silver, she realized distantly. Silver burned vampires, but it also suppressed human resistance. Take her to the spire, Leonarth commanded, his voice carrying across the balcony with the weight of absolute authority. I want answers, and I want to know who sent her. I saved you! Francis's voice cracked as they dragged her backward. The ballroom was chaos now, guests noticing the commotion, staff frozen in horror, security swarming. But Leonarth just watched her with those mercury eyes, his hand pressed to his mouth where her blood still stained his lips. There was no gratitude in that gaze, no relief, only suspicion. Only the cold certainty that she had tried to kill him. The guards hauled her through the service entrance, away from the glittering gala, away from her normal life. She caught one last glimpse of the vampire king standing in the moonlight, beautiful and terrible, and utterly convinced she was his enemy. She had no idea that within the hour, every vampire in the city would be searching for the human assassin who infiltrated the gala. She had no idea that the real traitor was watching from the shadows, smiling as his plan fell perfectly into place. She had no idea that the cell waiting for her in the Crimson Spire was lined with silver, warded with ancient magic, and designed to hold threats to the throne. And as the black car pulled away from the Sapphire District, Francis's phone, confiscated but still visible in the guard's hand, lit up with a news alert. Breaking! Vampire King survives alleged poisoning at exclusive gala. Human suspect in custody. She had offered her blood to save a monster's life. Now that monster thought she was trying to end his reign. And in the world of vampires, suspected assassins didn't get trials. They got interrogated until there was nothing left to question. Welcome back, bloodbound and shadow-sworn. Before you step into the Crimson Spire's darkness, make sure you've chosen your side. Subscribe to follow Francis into the Vampire King's domain. Like if you believe love can bloom in a gilded cage. And tell me, would you have offered your blood to save your enemy? From ballroom lights to ancient crypts, your engagement keeps these supernatural secrets alive. The Crimson Spire didn't look like a prison from the outside. It looked like old money and older power, all Gothic spires and stained glass windows that caught the moonlight like frozen blood. Frances had seen it from the bus countless times, looming over the city like a beautiful threat. She'd never imagined she'd see it from the inside. She was seeing it now. The cell they threw her into was nothing like the dungeons from movies. No rats, no chains hanging from stone walls, no medieval torture devices gathering dust in corners. Instead, it was a study in elegant cruelty. Cream marble floors, a four-poster bed with silk sheets the color of midnight, a chandelier that probably cost more than her entire apartment building, and silver. Silver everywhere. It lined the doorframe in delicate filigree, wrapped around the window bars in decorative spirals, inlaid in the floor in patterns that looked like art but felt like a cage. She could feel it humming against her skin, a low-level burn that made her nerves scream. The door sealed shut with a sound like a crypt closing. Frances stood in the center of the room, still wearing her blood-stained uniform, her wrist bruised where the guard had gripped her. Her lip throbbed where she'd cut it. She could still taste copper, could still feel the ice-cold press of Leonarth's mouth against hers, the desperate way he'd pulled her closer before his control snapped back into place. She'd saved his life, and now she was going to die for it. The rational part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive in a supernatural world that viewed humans as convenient snacks, was screaming at her to find an escape route. But there was nowhere to go. The windows were 3 stories up, and warded with magic she could feel prickling against her skin. The door was solid oak, reinforced with steel. Even if she could somehow breach the silver, there were probably a dozen vampires between her and freedom. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs finally giving out. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs, trying to force them still. Think, Frances. Think. But thinking required a clear head, and her head was full of the memory of crimson eyes and fangs too close to her throat. Of strong hands that could have snapped her spine, but had held her like she was something precious even while suspecting her of treason. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her pulse spike. Heavy boots, multiple sets, and then lighter steps, precise and deliberate, that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The door swung open. Leonarth Grayson stood in the threshold like a portrait of aristocratic fury. He'd changed from his tuxedo into something simpler. Black shirt, black slacks. But somehow the casual clothing made him more dangerous. Without the formal wear, she could see the predator beneath the polish. The way he moved with that terrible liquid grace. The way his eyes tracked her smallest movements like he was calculating exactly how fast he could cross the room and end her. Those eyes were silver again, cold mercury, utterly focused. 2 guards flanked him, but they stayed in the hallway. This interrogation, apparently, was personal. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a death knell. "You have 1 chance," he said, his voice soft and infinitely more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "Tell me who sent you. Tell me what poison you used. Tell me why." Frances stood, forcing her spine straight even though every instinct screamed at her to make herself smaller, less threatening, less visible. But submission wouldn't save her. Not with vampires. They respected strength, even in prey. "No one sent me," she said, and her voice only shook a little. "The poison wasn't mine. I heard them. 2 vampires in the eastern corridor. They said the neurotoxin was active, that you'd fall in 60 seconds. His head tilted. The movement was too sharp, too quick. Predatory. "You expect me to believe that a human server just happened to overhear an assassination plot? I don't expect you to believe anything." Frances lifted her chin. "But I'm telling you the truth. Your wine was poisoned. I saw you collapsing. I knew what would happen if you went feral in a room full of humans. She swallowed hard. I gave you clean blood to ground you. That's all. That's all. He repeated it like he was tasting the words, testing them. He moved closer, each step measured. You cut your own lip. Threw yourself at the vampire king, contaminated evidence. All to save me from myself? To save the 47 humans working that gala. Something flickered in his expression, too fast to read. He was close enough now that she could feel the chill radiating from his skin, could see the perfect marble smoothness that marked him as something other than human. 47, he murmured. You counted. I always count. Frances forced herself to hold his gaze. I've learned to keep track of exits, of humans, of how many bodies could drop before security responds. When you've seen what a feral vampire can do to a crowd, you learn to count everything. His eyes narrowed. What did they look like? These conspirators you claim to have heard. Finally, a question she could answer. I didn't see their faces clearly, they moved too fast. But one wore a signet ring, gold with a red stone, and the other... She closed her eyes, pulling up the memory. The other had your eyes, same bone structure, same build, like looking at a shadow version of you. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. When Frances opened her eyes, Leonarth's expression had gone from cold to absolutely glacial. Benedict, he whispered. And in that single word, she heard centuries of betrayal. The name hung between them like a blade waiting to fall. Benedict. Frances watched the vampire king's face transform. The cold, aristocratic mask cracked just enough to reveal something beneath. Something ancient and wounded and absolutely lethal. His hands curled into fists at his sides. The veins in his forearms went dark, blood rising to the surface in patterns that looked almost like shadows trying to escape his skin. You're certain? Not a question, a demand wrapped in silk and steel. I'm certain of what I saw. Frances held her ground even as every cell in her body screamed at her to step back. Whether it was your Benedict, I can't say. But whoever he was, he looked like you, moved like you, and he wanted you dead. Leonarth turned away sharply, his hand coming up to grip the back of his neck. The gesture was surprisingly human, vulnerable. For 3 heartbeats he stood there, perfectly still, and Frances realized he was fighting for control. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. My brother has always been ambitious, but this... He laughed, and the sound was broken glass scraping against stone. I should have seen it coming. Frances's pulse hammered in her throat. This was her chance, the moment where his certainty cracked and she could wedge herself into the gap. Then let me help you prove it. He turned back to face her, and the look in his silver eyes made her stomach drop. Help me? I'm the only witness you have. The only one who heard them. Who saw enough to identify... You're human. He said it like it explained everything. Like it was a fundamental law of the universe that rendered her useless. Fragile. Mortal. A liability I can't afford. I'm the human who saved your life when your own kind tried to kill you. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she was past the point of diplomatic caution. Fear had burned through her reserves of politeness hours ago. I'm also the human who just handed you your traitor. So maybe I'm a liability. Or maybe I'm the only person in this spire you can actually trust right now. The silence stretched. She could hear her own breathing, too loud in the perfect quiet. Could feel the weight of his gaze cataloging every micro-expression, every tell, reading her the way a scholar might read an ancient text. Finally, impossibly, his lips curved. Not quite a smile. Something darker. More dangerous. You have audacity, I'll grant you that. He moved closer, and Frances forced herself not to retreat. He stopped inches away, close enough that she could see flecks of darker silver in his irises, could smell winter and old libraries and something underneath that might have been blood. Most humans beg. They cry. They offer me anything. Their blood, their service, their souls, if I'll only spare them. I'm not interested in begging. Frances lifted her chin. I'm interested in staying alive. And the best way for me to do that is to help you find whoever actually poisoned you. Because right now, I'm the scapegoat. The easy target. The one everyone will blame while your real enemy walks free. His hand came up, fingers catching her chin. The touch was ice against her skin. His thumb traced along her jawline, a thoughtful gesture that felt obscenely intimate. Tell me, Frances Olvera. Her name in his mouth sounded like a curse and a caress. Why did you really do it? No one risks themselves for strangers. Not in my world. She met his eyes, held them. Because 47 people would have died, and because... She swallowed hard. Because my little sister works catering at the Obsidian Club downtown. Your kind frequent it. And if word got out that the Vampire King went feral at a gala, that the species barrier was breaking down, every supernatural in this city would panic. The violence would spread. Humans would die by the hundreds before the treaty councils could restore order. His thumb stilled against her skin. You saved me to protect the peace. I saved you because the alternative was a bloodbath. He studied her for another endless moment. Then he released her and stepped back. Something shifting in his expression. A decision made. Very well, Frances Olvera. You want to help? His smile was all predator now, beautiful and terrible. Then you'll stay in the Crimson Spire as my personal blood source. You'll move to the upper quarters. You'll be under guard at all times. And you'll tell me everything you remember about that corridor. Every word, every detail, every scent. Frances's mouth went dry. Your blood source? It's the only way to keep you alive. He moved toward the door. My enemies think you're my assassin. My allies think you're a security threat. But no one questions a king's right to keep his own supply. He glanced back, and there was something almost like regret in his eyes. Welcome to my world, Frances. I hope you survive it. The door opened. 2 different guards stood waiting, female vampires with expressions carved from ice. Take her to the east wing, Leonarth commanded. 5th floor, the Sapphire Suite. He looked at Frances one last time. Don't try to run. Don't try to contact anyone. And don't trust anyone in this spire except me. Do I even trust you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. His smile turned genuine, surprised. Probably not. But I'm the monster who wants you alive. That makes me your best option. Then he was gone, leaving Frances with 2 vampire guards and the sinking realization that she'd just traded one cage for another. This one lined with silk and lies and a dangerous predator who'd decided she was worth keeping. The Sapphire Suite was a study in controlled opulence. Frances stood in the center of the room, taking in details her exhausted brain struggled to process. Floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. No bars this time, just spelled glass that hummed with protective wards. A sitting area with velvet furniture in shades of midnight blue. Bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes that looked older than her entire bloodline. And through an open archway, a bedroom with a bed large enough to sleep 4. Everything here whispered wealth and permanence, the kind of space designed for someone who mattered. She was still trying to reconcile that with the fact that she was a prisoner when the smaller door to her right opened without warning. Leonarth stepped through carrying a silver tray. He'd shed the black shirt for something even simpler, a thin sweater that somehow made him look less like a king and more like a particularly dangerous graduate student. His hair was slightly disheveled, curls falling across his forehead in a way that was probably calculated but looked effortlessly careless. "You should eat." He set the tray on the low table between the couches. Real food. Bread still warm. Cheese. Fruit that looked impossibly fresh for 3 in the morning. "Your blood sugar dropped an hour ago. I could hear your heartbeat slowing from 2 floors away." Francis stared at him. "You were listening to my heartbeat?" "I listened to everything in my spire." He settled onto the opposite couch with that liquid grace that marked him as predator. "It's how I stay alive?" Or stayed alive, before someone decided to poison my wine with synthetic starvation serum. She moved toward the food slowly, half expecting it to be some kind of test. But her stomach was eating itself, and pride wouldn't keep her standing. She sank onto the couch and reached for the bread. "Synthetic?" "The natural version is made from the venom of a blood leech. Extremely rare. Extremely regulated." His eyes tracked her movements as she ate. "The synthetic version is easier to manufacture. Also easier to trace." He tilted his head. "Someone wanted this tracked back to them, or wanted me to think it could be traced." Francis swallowed her bite of bread. "A false flag?" "Perhaps." His lips curved slightly. "You're cleverer than you pretend to be. I'm a server who works supernatural events. You learn to be clever, or you learn to be dead." She reached for the cheese, trying to ignore how his gaze followed her hand. "So what happens now? You keep me locked up here while you hunt your brother?" "I keep you here while I confirm it was my brother." The correction was soft but pointed. Benedict has always coveted the throne, but coveting and acting are different species of ambition. I need proof before I move against him. Real proof, not just the testimony of a human who might have been mistaken in dim light. The words stung more than they should have. "I know what I saw." "I believe you think you do." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and suddenly the space between them felt much smaller. "But memory is unreliable. Trauma distorts perception. And you were terrified. Your adrenaline was so high I could taste it in your blood." Heat crept up her neck. The memory of that kiss, if it could even be called a kiss, flooded back. His mouth on hers. The desperate way she'd cut her lip. The cold press of his fangs against her skin. "It wasn't romantic," she said quietly. "If that's what you're thinking." "I'm thinking it was survival. For both of us." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm also thinking you saved 47 lives tonight, including mine. That deserves more than a cell, even a gilded one." Francis set down the bread. "Then let me go home." "I can't." And for the first time, he sounded almost regretful. "The moment you touched me, you became part of this. My enemies will assume you're either my assassin or my ally. Either way, you're a target. The only safe place for you right now is here, under my protection." Protected or imprisoned? Both. He didn't flinch from the truth. "I won't lie. To you, Francis, you're trapped in a game you didn't choose to play. But I can keep you alive while we play it. That's more than anyone else in this city can offer you right now." She wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the casual way he'd decided her fate. But the exhaustion was catching up with her, dragging at her bones, making her thoughts slow and syrupy. "My sister," she said. "Sheila. She'll be worried. She'll report me missing." "Already handled." At her sharp look, he raised a hand. "I had my people contact the gala management. They've been told you had a family emergency and left early. Your phone is sending automated responses. As far as anyone knows, you're fine." That's creepy, controlling. Exactly what a vampire king would do. Efficient. It's necessary. He stood, and she realized how much space he'd been deliberately not taking up while sitting. Standing, he seemed to fill the room. "Get some rest." Tomorrow we start working through your memories of that corridor. Every detail matters. He moved toward the door, then paused. There are clothes in the wardrobe, toiletries in the bathroom. Everything you need. If you require anything else, press the button by the bed. A guard will respond. A guard or a warden? That almost smile returned. In this world, they're the same thing. He studied her for a long moment. You did a brave thing tonight, Francis Olvera. Foolish, but brave. I'm not sure yet if I should thank you for it or curse you. I'm not sure either, she admitted. He laughed then, a real sound, surprised and genuine. It transformed his face, made him look almost human, almost safe. Then he was gone, the door closing with a whisper. And Francis was alone with the food and the books, and the terrible knowledge that somewhere in this beautiful prison, a traitor was plotting his next move, and she was the only witness who could stop him, if she lived long enough. Francis woke to find Leonarth sitting in the armchair beside her bed, not standing, not looming, just sitting in the pre-dawn darkness, watching her sleep like it was the most natural thing in the world. Moonlight cut through the window, turning his pale skin luminescent, his dark curls ink-black against the silver light. She should have screamed, should have reached for a weapon, a lamp, anything. Instead, she found herself oddly unsurprised, as if some part of her had known he'd be there. "How long have you been watching me?" Her voice came out rough with sleep. "An hour. Perhaps 2. No shame in the admission. You talk in your sleep. Did you know that? Heat flooded her cheeks. What did I say? Names mostly. Sheila, your father. His head tilted. And once, very clearly, not the throat. His expression was unreadable. Bad dreams? Old memories. Frances pushed herself up against the headboard, pulling the blanket higher. She was still in her server's uniform, wrinkled and blood-stained. Do you sleep? Occasionally, when I trust my surroundings. His lips curved slightly. I haven't slept in 3 days. Because someone tried to kill you. Because my brother tried to kill me. The certainty in his voice was absolute now. I spent the night in the archives. Benedict requisitioned synthetic starvation serum 6 weeks ago. Claimed it was for interrogation purposes. The timing fits perfectly. Frances's stomach dropped. Then you have your proof. I have evidence of requisition, not evidence of use. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Benedict is clever. He'll have covered his tracks, fabricated witnesses, created alternative narratives. Those mercury eyes found hers. Which is why I need you to remember everything. The library has resources, memory enhancement rituals. Harmless to humans, they might help you recall details you've forgotten. Or they might let you plant false memories. They might. He didn't deny it. But I won't. You're more valuable to me as a genuine witness than as a puppet. The casual acknowledgement of her value, her usefulness, should have stung. Instead, it felt almost like respect. Like he saw her as a piece on the board, rather than just a pawn. There's something else, he said, and his voice had gone carefully neutral. Benedict sent a message this morning. He wants to visit, to ensure the human witness is being treated appropriately. The sarcasm dripped like acid. I can refuse him. But that might tip our hand. Make him suspect we know. Frances's pulse kicked up. You want me to meet him? I want you to observe him. See if he's the man you saw in that corridor. Leonarth stood, moving to the window. If he is, you'll know. Bodies don't lie, even when faces do. The way he moves, his mannerisms, the small things that make him him. And if I identify him? Frances slid out of bed, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. What then? Then we have a problem. He turned to face her. Because I can't move against Benedict without the council's approval. And the council won't approve without proof of intent. Your testimony alone isn't enough. Humans can be compelled, bribed, mistaken. He crossed his arms. I need him to make a mistake, to reveal himself. You want to use me as bait. I want to give you a chance to survive this. The correction was sharp. Right now, you're a loose end, a witness who can identify conspirators. Benedict will want you dead. But if he thinks you're just a frightened human who saw nothing useful, who I'm keeping around as a convenient snack, he shrugged. Then you become scenery. Ignorable. Safe. Francis laughed and it came out bitter. Safe. Right. Because pretending to be vampire food is so much safer than telling the truth. It is when the truth makes you a target. He moved closer, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. I know what I'm asking. I know it's not fair. But fair stopped mattering the moment you kissed me in that corridor. I saved your life. You complicated mine. But there was no anger in his voice, just exhaustion. And now we're both trapped in the consequences. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither could say. Finally, Francis nodded. When does he arrive? 2 hours before dawn. Leonarth gestured toward the wardrobe. There are clothes. Something appropriate for a blood source, expensive enough to show my status, revealing enough to be distracting. At her sharp look, he added, You're playing a role, Francis. Sell it or we both die. She wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the costume, the performance, the reduction of herself to prop in his deadly game. But he was right. Survival required sacrifice, and if wearing a provocative dress and pretending to be cattle kept her sister safe, kept those 47 servers alive, then she'd do it. Fine. She moved toward the wardrobe. But when this is over, when Benedict is exposed, you let me go. Deal? Leonard's expression flickered with something she couldn't read. Deal. He headed for the door, then paused. Francis? Thank you. For trusting me. I don't trust you. The words came out automatic. Honest. Good. His smile was sad. You shouldn't. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with a wardrobe full of silken lies and the terrible certainty that in 2 hours she'd be face to face with the man who wanted both her and Leonarth dead. And she'd have to smile while he decided if she was worth killing. The dress was a calculated insult wrapped in silk. Deep crimson, the color of fresh blood, with a neckline that plunged low enough to expose her collarbone and the vulnerable stretch of her throat. The fabric clung to her body like a second skin, leaving nothing to imagination. Francis stared at her reflection and barely recognized herself. She looked like prey dressed up for slaughter. The door opened without warning. Leonarth stepped through, already dressed in formal attire, a black suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. His eyes swept over her once, clinical and assessing, before he nodded. Perfect. You look exactly like what Benedict expects to see. He crossed to her, producing a velvet box from his pocket. One more thing. Inside was a choker, black leather with a single ruby at the throat, held in place by a delicate silver chain, a collar in everything but name. Francis's jaw tightened. Is that really necessary? It's a tracker and a panic button. He lifted it from the box. If Benedict tries anything, you press the stone twice. I'll be there in seconds. His eyes met hers. I won't let him hurt you, Francis. That's a promise. She wanted to refuse, wanted to throw the collar back in his face and tell him she wasn't his pet. But survival required swallowing pride. She lifted her chin, exposing her throat. His fingers were ice against her skin as he fastened the choker. She felt the soft click of the clasp, the slight weight settling against her pulse point. When he stepped back, something flickered in his expression. Possessiveness, maybe, or guilt. He's waiting in the throne room. Leonarth offered his arm. Stay close. Don't speak unless spoken to. And if he asks you questions, keep your answers simple. Frightened. You're just a human who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Francis took his arm, feeling the cold strength beneath the expensive fabric. And what are you? I'm the monster who owns you. He said it flatly, without inflection. That's what he needs to believe. The throne room was designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow. Stained glass windows depicting battles between vampires and ancient hunters. And at the far end, 2 thrones carved from black marble, one slightly higher than the other. Empty now, but radiating authority. Benedict Grayson stood in the center of the room, studying a tapestry with apparent interest. Francis's breath caught. He was Leonarth's mirror image rendered in sharper angles. Same height, same build, same jet-black curls. But where Leonarth moved with liquid grace, Benedict's movements were more aggressive, predatory in a way that set her teeth on edge. And his eyes, when he turned to face them, were a colder shade of silver, calculating. Brother. Benedict's smile didn't reach those eyes. I came as soon as I heard about your incident. How thoughtful. Leonarth's voice was silk over steel. Though I'm surprised the news reached you so quickly. Rumors travel fast in our world. Benedict's gaze slid to Francis, cataloging her from head to toe. She felt his assessment like insects crawling over her skin. And who is this lovely creature? My guest. Leonarth's hand settled on her lower back, possessive. Francis saved my life last night. I'm keeping her close as a reward. Benedict moved closer, circling them slowly. Francis forced herself to breathe normally, to not track his movements like the threat he was. This was the man from the corridor. She was certain now. Same build, same way of moving. That aggressive prowl that Leonarth had refined into something more controlled. Saved your life how exactly? Benedict stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell him, smoke and something acrid beneath. The reports were unclear. Francis dropped her gaze, channeling every ounce of fear she'd felt in that cell. I saw His Majesty struggling. I thought he needed blood. I offered mine. How generous. Benedict's finger caught her chin, forcing her head up. His touch burned colder than Leonarth's. And you just happened to have access to him, in a secured gala? I was serving champagne. I saw him on the balcony. Her voice shook, not entirely an act. I didn't think. She acted on instinct. Leonarth's hand tightened on her back. Foolish, but effective. I recovered quickly enough to prevent any unpleasantness. Benedict's eyes narrowed. And the poison? I heard there was poison involved. A contamination in the wine supply. Leonarth's tone was bored. We're investigating the source. Probably just a bad batch from the Eastern Territories. Francis watched Benedict's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Recognition flared. This was him. This was the man who'd ordered the hit. And he thought he'd failed. Bad batch. Benedict released her chin. How convenient that this human happened to be there to save you from a bad batch. Convenient indeed. Leonarth's smile was sharp. Almost like fate wanted me to keep her around. The 2 brothers stared at each other. Francis felt the tension crackling between them. Centuries of rivalry and resentment compressed into a single moment. One wrong word and they'd tear each other apart. And she'd be collateral damage. Benedict stepped back, first. Well, I'm glad you're safe, brother, though I'd be careful with your new pet. His eyes found Francis again. Humans are fragile, easy to break. I'll keep that in mind. Benedict moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, one more thing. There's a vote coming up. Council business, I'll need your support. His smile was all teeth. Family should stand together after all. Of course. Leonarth's voice gave nothing away. Family first. When Benedict left, the silence was deafening. Frances waited until his footsteps faded before she let out the breath she'd been holding. That was him. The man from the corridor. I'm certain. Leonarth's hand slipped from her back. I know. I could smell his satisfaction when I mentioned the Bad Batch. He thought he'd gotten away with it. So what now? Leonarth's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and every trace of color drained from his face. Now, he said quietly, his voice hollow with fury and fear. We have a much bigger problem. He turned the screen toward her. The message was simple, devastating. A photo of a young woman bound to a chair, terrified eyes staring at the camera. Below it, 3 words. Lower the wards. Midnight. Frances's knees gave out. She knew that face. Would know it anywhere. Sheila. Frances couldn't breathe. The phone screen blurred as tears burned her eyes. Sheila. Her baby sister. 22 years old with her whole life ahead of her. Bound. Terrified. Held hostage because Frances had dared to save a monster's life. No. The word came out broken. No. 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 Leonarth's hands caught her shoulders, steadying her before she could collapse completely. Frances. Look at me. She couldn't. Couldn't look away from her sister's face, from the duct tape across her mouth, from the fear in her eyes that Frances knew intimately because she'd worn that same expression every day after their father died. Frances. Sharper now. Command threaded through concern. I need you to breathe. Can you do that? She dragged air into her lungs. Once. Twice. The panic receded just enough for rational thought to claw its way back. He has Sheila. Her voice sounded distant. Wrong. Benedict has my sister. I know. Leonarth's jaw was tight, his eyes hard as winter steel. This is leverage. He's forcing your hand. Lower the wards at midnight. Frances looked up at him. That's the deal, isn't it? I disable your defenses and he lets her go. He won't let her go. The certainty in his voice was crushing. Even if you cooperate, she's a witness. She's seen his face. She knows too much. The words landed like blows. Frances shook her head, refusing to accept it. Then what do I do? Just let her die? You let me handle this. Leonarth released her shoulders, already reaching for his phone. I have resources. Trackers. People who specialize in extractions. There's no time. Frances grabbed his wrist, stopping him. Midnight is 7 hours away. Even if you could find her, even if you could mount a rescue, Benedict would know. He'd kill her the moment he suspected. Her fingers tightened. The only way she lives is if I give him what he wants. You give him what he wants, and we all die. Leonarth's voice was flat. Final. The daylight wards are the only thing keeping the Crimson Spire secure. Lower them, and Benedict's forces can storm this place at noon. He'll slaughter everyone inside, including you, including Sheila, if he even bothers bringing her. Then what? Frances's voice cracked. I just sacrifice her? Let her die so your fortress stays safe? Yes. No hesitation, no apology. Because if you don't, hundreds die. Everyone in this spire, every human servant, every vampire who's remained loyal to me. His eyes burned into hers. I'm sorry. I know what I'm asking. But one life doesn't outweigh hundreds. Frances stared at him. At this creature who'd held her gently and watched her sleep and promised to keep her safe. Who was now telling her to abandon her sister to save his kingdom. You're a monster, she whispered. I know. Something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe, or just resignation. But I'm a monster who's trying to prevent a massacre. That has to count for something. It didn't. It couldn't. Frances pulled away from him, her mind racing. 7 hours. She had 7 hours to figure out how to save Sheila without dooming everyone else. 7 hours to find a solution that didn't exist. Unless. The control room. The words came out steady. Cold. Where is it? Leonarth's eyes narrowed. Francis. If I'm going to live in this prison, I should know its exits, its weak points. She met his gaze without flinching. That's what you'd do, isn't it? Learn the territory. Plan for contingencies. He studied her for a long moment. She could see him weighing her words, testing them for deception. Finally, he nodded slowly. East Tower. 6th floor. But it's guarded. Warded. You'd never get close without me knowing. Good. Francis turned away, moving toward the window. Her reflection stared back at her. A woman in a blood-red dress with a collar around her throat. A prisoner playing at being prey. Then I won't have to worry about accidentally wandering into restricted areas. The silence behind her was heavy with suspicion. You're planning something. Not a question. An accusation. I'm planning to survive. She didn't turn around, couldn't let him see her face, see the lie taking shape behind her eyes. Isn't that what you told me to do? His footsteps approached, stopped just behind her. She could feel the cold radiating from him, could sense him trying to read her heartbeat, her scent, all the small tells that gave away human deception. Don't do anything foolish, he said quietly. Benedict is expecting betrayal. He'll be watching for it. Then I'll be careful. Francis forced herself to meet his eyes in the reflection. You said it yourself. I'm clever. I'll figure something out. Francis, I need to be alone. The words came out harsher than intended. Please. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Thought he'd chain her to the room or post guards at her door. Instead, he stepped back. The ward's lower at the control panel in the East Tower, but there's a secondary override in my private chambers. He moved toward the door. No one else knows about it. I'm telling you this because if something happens to me, someone needs to be able to protect this place. Francis nodded, not trusting her voice. Don't make me regret trusting you. His hand touched the door handle. Please. Then he was gone. Francis waited until his footsteps faded. Then she moved to the desk, pulled out parchment and a pen, and began to write. Not a plan, not a scheme, an apology. Leonarth, I'm sorry. You told me not to be foolish, but foolishness is all I have left. By the time you read this, I'll have lowered the wards. Benedict will come for you at noon. You'll think I betrayed you. Maybe I did. But Sheila is my sister, my family, the only person in this world who loves me without condition. And I can't let her die. Not for your kingdom. Not for hundreds of strangers. Not even for you. I know what this makes me. I know I'm condemning people to save one person. I'll carry that weight for whatever time I have left, but I'll carry it knowing Sheila is safe. I'm sorry. For everything. For saving you. For failing you. For not being strong enough to let her go. She folded the letter, placed it on his pillow where he'd find it. Then she slipped the vial of sleeping draught, the one she'd found in the bathroom cabinet, into her pocket, and waited for midnight. Midnight arrived with the silence of a held breath. Francis stood in the control room, her finger hovering over the crystalline panel that regulated the Crimson Spire's daylight wards. Behind her, 2 guards lay slumped against the wall. The sleeping draught had worked faster than she'd expected. Guilt twisted in her stomach. They were just doing their jobs, protecting their king from threats exactly like her. The panel pulsed with ethereal blue light, ancient magic condensed into something that looked deceptively simple. 1 touch. That's all it would take. 1 touch and the shields would lower at noon, letting sunlight flood the vampire stronghold for the first time in 3 centuries. 1 touch, and everyone inside would burn. Her hand shook, The phone in her pocket buzzed. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. Another photo. Sheila, tears streaming down her face, a silver blade pressed to her throat. The message below was simple. Tick-tock. Big sister. Frances pressed her palm to the panel. The crystal flared white-hot, then died to black. A low vibration hummed through the floor. The wards powering down, layer by layer, like a fortress lowering its gates. In 12 hours, when the sun rose, the Crimson Spire would be defenseless. She'd done it. She'd betrayed the monster who'd tried to save her. The walk back to her rooms felt like a funeral march. Every shadow seemed to whisper traitor. Every portrait's eyes followed her with judgment. She'd damned hundreds to save one. The math was simple. Damning. Leonarth's chambers were dark when she slipped inside. He sat in the armchair by the window, exactly where she'd left him, a crystal glass of day wine in his hand. His eyes were closed. Peaceful. Trusting. She'd left the letter on his pillow. Now she pulled the second vial from her pocket, the one she'd been too afraid to use. Insurance, she'd told herself. But looking at him now, she understood it for what it really was. Cowardice. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the sleeping king. "I'm so sorry." His eyes opened. Frances stumbled back, the vial slipping from her fingers and shattering against marble. Silver eyes, clear, alert, utterly awake, fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. "Leonarth, I know what you did." His voice was soft, gentle. It made everything worse. "I've known since you asked about the control room." The world tilted. "You knew?" "Your heartbeat spiked when I mentioned the East Tower. You looked away when you said you'd be careful." He stood, setting down the untouched wine. "You're a terrible liar, Frances Olvera. It's one of the things He stopped, corrected himself. "It's one of your more endearing qualities." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. "Then why didn't you stop me?" "Because I understand love." He crossed to where she stood frozen. "And because I needed Benedict to think he'd won." His fingers found the choker at her throat. The tracker. The panic button. "Did you really think I'd let you walk into his trap alone?" The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The letter she'd written. The sleeping draft he'd never drunk. The way he'd told her about the secondary override, planting the idea in her head. "You used me." The words came out hollow. "You used me as bait. I gave you a choice." His thumb traced the edge of the collar. "You could have come to me. Trusted me with the truth. We could have planned this together." Pain flickered, or across his face. "But you chose to sacrifice yourself, to shoulder the weight alone, just like you did in that corridor. He has Sheila. And I have 43 vampires positioned around the city, tracking the signal from the photo Benedict sent." Leonarth's smile was sharp as broken glass. "We've known where she is for the past 6 hours, but I needed him to show his hand, needed him to commit to the attack." Frances's knees gave out. Leonarth caught her, his arms cold and impossibly strong. "When the sun rises," he murmured against her hair, "Benedict will come with his forces, expecting to find me helpless. Instead, he'll find a trap." He pulled back, meeting her eyes. "Trust me now, Frances, please. Trust me to end this." The phone buzzed again. Both of them looked down at the screen. "Noon tomorrow. Bring the human to the eastern gates. Alone. Or Sheila dies screaming." Leonarth's expression went glacial. "Well then, I suppose we'd better give him what he wants." The sun rose like an executioner's blade. Frances stood at the eastern gates, Leonarth's hand a vice around her wrist. She could feel the heat building already, that terrible, cleansing warmth that meant death for everything inside these walls. The wards were down. The Crimson Spire was defenseless for the first time in 3 centuries, and Benedict was smiling, He emerged from the dawn shadows with 20 soldiers at his back, all of them armed with silver and ancient magic. Sheila stumbled beside him, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. When she saw Francis, she made a muffled sound behind the tape, relief and horror tangled together. "Brother," Benedict's voice carried across the courtyard. "How noble of you to deliver yourself. I expected more resistance. You expected me to burn." Leonarth's tone was conversational, bored. "Unfortunately for you, I've always preferred the night." Something flickered in Benedict's expression. Uncertainty. His eyes swept the courtyard, cataloging the emptiness, the lack of guards, the eerie silence. "Where are your soldiers?" "Where they need to be." Leonarth released Francis's wrist. "Let the girl go, Benedict. This is between us." "Everything is between us. It always has been." Benedict yanked Sheila closer, the silver blade finding her throat again. 3 centuries of standing in your shadow. 3 centuries of watching you play the benevolent king while I did the dirty work. His smile twisted. But not anymore. The moment that sunlight touches the throne room, your reign ends. "Then you'd better hurry." Leonarth glanced at the sky. "You have maybe 10 minutes before the angle shifts." Benedict's jaw tightened. He shoved Sheila forward, sending her sprawling across the stones. Francis lunged for her sister, dropping to her knees and tearing at the bindings with shaking fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered against Sheila's hair. "I'm so sorry." Touching. Benedict advanced, his soldiers fanning out in a perfect attack formation. "But ultimately, pointless. You're both dead. He's dead. And I finally take what should have been mine from the beginning." The sunlight crept across the courtyard like spilled gold. It touched the fountain first, then the steps. Then the doorway that led to the throne room, where Leonarth stood watching his brother with something that might have been pity. Benedict raised his hand. "Kill them." The soldiers surged forward, and the shadows came alive. They poured from every archway, every window, every corner where darkness still clung to stone. 43 vampires moving with that terrible liquid grace, their eyes burning crimson, their fangs bared. Leonarth's loyal guard, hidden in the deep places where sunlight couldn't reach. Benedict's smile died. "No. Did you really think I'd be unprepared?" Leonarth moved then, faster than Francis's eyes could track. One moment he was standing in the doorway. The next he had Benedict by the throat, slamming him against the fountain with enough force to crack marble. "You're clever, brother, but you've never understood strategy. You see the obvious move and think you've won." The battle erupted around them. Silver clashed against fang, magic scorched the air. Francis pulled Sheila behind the eastern gate, pressing her sister's face against her shoulder so she wouldn't see the violence painting the courtyard red. Benedict writhed in Leonarth's grip, his own hands clawing at his brother's wrist. "You can't kill me. The council will understand when I show them the evidence." Leonarth's voice was ice and finality. "The requisition forms, the testimony, the kidnapping." His grip tightened. "You've committed treason, Benedict. The penalty is explicit." "She made you weak." Benedict's eyes found Francis wild with hatred. "That human made you soft." "She made me remember what I was fighting for." Leonarth's free hand caught his brother's jaw, forcing eye contact. "Power without purpose is just cruelty. You never learned that." The sunlight touched Leonarth's shoulder. His skin began to smoke. "Leo." Francis's scream tore from her throat, but Leonarth didn't move, didn't flinch. He held Benedict in the light, held him as the sun crept higher, held him as his own flesh began to burn. "We end this now," he said quietly, "together," and drove his brother into the fountain, into the space where sunlight pooled like liquid fire, where both of them began to burn. Francis didn't think, didn't hesitate. She tore the crimson cloak from a fallen soldier and threw herself into the sunlight, The fabric stretched above her like a burning canopy. Her hands found Leonarth's shoulders and yanked with strength born of pure desperation. He came away from Benedict, stumbling backward into shadow. His skin was charred black across his shoulder and neck, the flesh already trying to knit itself back together with agonizing slowness. He collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, unnecessary for a vampire, which meant the pain was overwhelming. Benedict wasn't so lucky. He'd taken the full force of the sun. What remained in the fountain wasn't a vampire anymore. Wasn't anything anymore. The battle ended as suddenly as it began. Benedict's soldiers, seeing their leader's fate, either fled or surrendered. Leonarth's guards secured the courtyard with brutal efficiency. And Frances knelt beside the vampire king, her hands shaking as she tried to assess damage she had no idea how to treat. "You idiot!" Her voice broke. "You absolute idiot! You were burning!" So was he. Leonarth's eyes found hers, still silver despite the pain. It was the only way to be certain. He had contingencies, fail-safes. If I'd killed him in shadow, his followers would have claimed foul play. His hand caught hers, stopping her frantic inspection. But no one can argue with what they saw. He attacked. I defended. The sun chose. The sun nearly chose you too. Frances pressed her palm to his unmarred cheek. "Don't ever do that again. I'll try not to schedule any more fratricidal confrontations." His attempt at humor fell flat. He looked past her to where Sheila sat trembling against the gate. "Your sister. Alive. Terrified. But alive." Frances glanced back. "Thanks to you. Thanks to us." He struggled to sit up, wincing. "You lowered the wards. You played the traitor perfectly. Benedict never suspected. Because I wasn't playing." The admission tasted like ashes. "I really did betray you. I really was going to sacrifice everyone for her." "I know." No judgment in his voice, just acceptance. That's what made it convincing. His thumb traced her knuckles. "And that's why I trust you now. Because you love fiercely enough to make terrible choices. To shoulder impossible weight." His eyes held hers. "I need someone like that beside me, not as blood source, not as prisoner, but as—" He stopped, uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. Frances's heart hammered against her ribs. "As what?" "As my equal." The words came out quiet, raw. "As my partner in this impossible task of keeping peace between our kinds. As—" He swallowed. "As the person I choose. Not for sustenance, not for strategy. But because when I thought you'd actually betrayed me, when I read your letter, I realized I'd rather burn in sunlight than rule without you." The courtyard had gone silent. Every vampire, every human, every witness to the battle now watched them with varying degrees of shock. Frances didn't care. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard," she said. "And I'm a server at supernatural events. I've heard some truly terrible ones." His laugh was startled, genuine. "Is that a yes or a no?" "It's a, we need to talk about this when you're not half dead and my sister isn't traumatized." She stood, offering her hand. "But it's not a no." He took her hand. Let her pull him to his feet. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, watching, a human girl helping the vampire king stand. "The council will object," he said. "They'll say you're a security risk, a distraction, inappropriate. Then we'll prove them wrong." Frances met his eyes. Together. Together. He repeated it like a vow, like a promise. Then, in front of his court and her sister and the rising sun, he brought her hand to his lips. Not to bite. Not to feed. Just to kiss her knuckles with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Frances Olvera," he murmured, "you saved my life, my kingdom, and possibly my soul." His smile was soft, wondering. "What would you have me give you in return?" She looked at this beautiful monster who'd trusted her enough to let her betray him. Who'd burned himself to end a war? Who was offering her not a cage, but a crown? Your heart, she said simply. And your truth. Always. Done. No hesitation, no doubt. They were always yours anyway. And as the sun rose over the Crimson Spire, the monster and the human stood together. And the world didn't end.